Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Franchise Hour, Season 5, Episode 4. And while we usually talk about franchising, today we are going a little bit further than that. And we talk about consumer wellness and consumer care. And for that reason, I have the best guest I could imagine with me. I have with me today the Assistant Secretary of the DTI for from the Consumer Protection Group, Attorney Undersecretary Attorney Anne Claire Cabochan. She is the real champion of the consumer welfare in the department and has extremely extensive experience with it, working in all the departments of the TTI, from the Bureau of Standards to the Trade Enforcement Bureau, Consumer Policy and Advocacy Bureau. So a real champion of the consumer welfare. Thank you very much, Undersecretary Cabochan, for being my guest today. It's really a pleasure to have you today as our guest.
Good afternoon, Sir Kotik. I am Assistant Secretary. I just want to correct that at the start, and it's really my privilege to be part of your show this afternoon.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary. Let's start. How does the Consumer Act of the Philippines actually protect the consumers?
Well, the Consumer Act of the Philippines is a law that was passed really primarily to ensure that the welfare of consumers are amply protected. There are different chapters there. There is a chapter on deceptive sales. There is a chapter on sales promotions, on weights and measures. So there are different chapters and different agencies involved. DTI being the main implementing agency, but you also have the Department of Agriculture, the Food and Drug Administration, and even the Banco Central for Financial Services. So it cuts across government, but the law is really there to protect consumers from unfair business practices and fraudulent transactions.
What about today, ma'am? Practically, most transactions are already online. How
Yes.
actually online consumer protected?
The Consumer Act does not distinguish between a brick and mortar store, the physical store, and an online store. So the provisions of the Consumer Act of the Philippines applies equally whether you are selling in a store, a physical stall or a store in a mall or a freestanding store, or if you are selling your goods or services online. So that simply means, Mr. Kotik, that all of these online sellers must follow the law at the same way that other physical store owners are following the law. And so when we do monitoring, we also try to monitor as much as we can that digital space, the online platforms, those marketplaces in social media, to ensure that we're also able to look at their activities, especially because we receive reports on scams and pyramiding schemes and the like. But just to say that government does not have that the resources to look at every single transaction or um, online seller that you could find, and that is why consumers and even the private sector through associations such as your association could play a role to ensure that only those that are legitimate players are able to sell online.
We also have the E-commerce Act, the Republic Act 8792. How does that protect consumers?
Well, their e-commerce act, which is the e-commerce act of 2000, recognizes, of course, e-documents, e-signatures, electronic transactions. But it also makes reference to the provisions of the Consumer Act. And so even the penalties for deceptive sales, for instance, for unconscionable sales acts, um, are those that are what you find under the Consumer Act. Because the law itself has incorporated those provisions by reference.
As you said, the law was written in the year 2000. Don't you feel it's already outdated?
Well, of course, in 2000, we have not heard of e-transactions. That was decades before the advent of all these online platforms. So if you look at the e-commerce act, you could really see that it does not capture the the environment that we are in right now, where people are really buying and selling online. And so the Department of Trade and Industry has been supporting quite vigorously um, an initiative coming from both houses of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate, in the passage of an updated law called the Internet Transactions Act. And under that particular draft legislation, there would be really sanctions, um, heavier sanctions against those that violate the law, and a way of really going after these online sellers. So to be able to protect consumers better. And there is also under that law what you call a trust mark, which they could show in their landing page, and which would give an ordinary consumer who does these online transactions the confidence to deal with them. So we are supporting that particular law. Hopefully
Uh,
it becomes law soon.
I hope also. Uh, so right now, you still feel that with all the online transactions, the public is still very much safe and protected with the existing laws what we have.
Well, all we can say is that our Consumer Act of the Philippines does protect the public. We just think that the new technologies that have made all these online platforms and online sellers thrive need more targeted legislation to be able to also run after those that are just using that platform to do illegal activities. So, what DTI, for instance, has done is coordinate very actively with these platforms so that we are also able to tell them what complaints we receive, and also to remind them of whatever regulations and laws are in place, which they should follow the same way that a brick and mortar store should follow.
Uh, if I, for example, I have an example, Asik. If I just bought recently something online, and
Yes.
in my mind, it had a certain size, but when I got it, it was animals for my apple. And in my mind, when I saw the picture online, it was like the animals looked big. But when I got them, they were so tiny. They were probably 2 centimeter long only. Would this actually be a reason to return something, even though there was no defect? But it was just not in the mind of. It was not like in my mind.
Okay. So, first, I would look at it this way. When you visited the site from where you bought it, were there any specifications as to size? Because if
There
there
was none.
were,
Yes, there was none. That's correct.
there was none.
Mm,
Um, but your impression is that it was of a particular size, right?
correct, ma'am.
Oh.
Yes,
So that is really something that's a little tricky, because um, you cannot say that you were deceived, because there was
correct.
nothing in the online site that says that it was a particular size, and you are just one of the victims of that. I even know of a colleague who's also an assistant secretary who ordered a dish rack thinking that she could use it in the kitchen, and what arrived in her house was a dish rack for a Barbie doll. So
Mm,
just like
yeah.
your experience.
Mm,
And
mm,
she always tells me she felt so stupid to have to have gone through a transaction like that. And so what we're really doing now, so that we don't have more consumers victimized, is teach them how to become smart online shoppers. So we teach them, Mr. Kotik, to ask questions from the
mm.
seller, um, to look at customer reviews, because I'm sure that there would be customer reviews. You can use crowdsourcing to ask your friends whether they have any good things or bad things to say about something. And most of all, check whether they are registered, whether they have the necessary permits and licenses. So, because there are sellers, if you engage them, who are just willing to show you a tape measure and measure it in front of you, or send you a photo that this is the measurement, in which case you would know that, oh, it's just a few centimeters, that is not what I was thinking of.
Mm.
But if the seller does not respond to you, what we always tell consumers is, probably you should look for another seller, because there are a lot online. So we know that the space out there, the digital space, have both, you know, legitimate players and those that are not legitimate. So we try to empower the consumers to make the right choice, make wise use of their money by really doing their own due diligence, just like what you do when you do franchising.
That is correct, yes. That we do very much due diligence.
So you charge it to experience.
That's it, ma'am. But my apple still played with the toy, so it was okay actually. But it was just in my mind that it was, it was not what I wanted. Call it that way.
Exactly.
And another protection, I think, what is good for the consumers is the Price Act, Republic Act 7581. What business category actually applicable to the Price Act? And if you can explain a little bit also what this is all about, Madam.
Well, the Price Act really is a is the law that enumerates, and it has an amendment, so it enumerates those products that are considered as basic necessities and prime commodities. So I make a distinction between the two because they are important. When you say basic necessities, these are the products, and they are listed under the law. These are the products that are necessary for survival. The prime commodities are those that would make your life a little more comfortable. The Price Act was passed to ensure that during times of calamities, emergencies, that when a declaration is made, the prices of those basic commodities are frozen. They do not move for 60 days. So if you remember, Mr. Kotik, every time there is a strong typhoon and there is a state of calamity that is declared, you would hear about DTI going around to ensure that prices of basic commodities are frozen. They do not move for 60 days. That will ensure that these products that are necessary for survival are accessible and affordable because they're necessary for survival. So, what are examples of those that we look at in DTI? Canned sardines, coffee, not the 3-in-1, but the ordinary coffee, sugar, condiments, noodles. So what you need to survive. On the prime commodities, you would have construction materials like cement, and you would have canned meat because they would make your life more comfortable, because like when you have a calamity, usually you would need building materials to repair. The DTI is not the only implementing agency. There's the Department of Agriculture that handles fresh produce, fish, and other agricultural products like rice. There's also the Department of Health for medicines, and that is very important at this time, and medical supplies and devices. And for Department of Energy, it would be the LPG tanks. So DNR for firewood. So these are the items that we need for survival. Now, the Price Act is there to ensure that no price manipulation or hoarding or profiteering happens during these times of emergencies. So that is really the object of the Price Act.
That sounds excellent, ma'am. How can also the Philippine National Standard of the Bureau of Philippine Standards of the TTI help entrepreneurs?
Okay, now I think the first thing we need to understand about standards are that standards are voluntary. But having said that, when you have a standard which sets forth, technical specifications and a very efficient way and safe way of doing or producing something, when a business uses a standard, when it manufactures, or when it uses the standard, the quality management standard, just like 9001, which is your ISO 9001, a quality management standard, it will not only help you improve your performance, it will also help you save because you have more efficient processes. It will make your processes um, more predictable, less prone to breakdowns. So that is going to make your businesses more efficient. So we always say that when businesses use these standards, they are able to be more competitive. So I think I would like to relate it to a student. When you are a student, you have 75, you pass. Those are the ordinary, just so that you can pass the course. When you have a standard, you may have higher ambitions. Probably you are going to compel yourself to study more hours, to do this and that, to be able to get to that higher level. But then, if you are there, you are more competitive because then afterwards you can probably compete for scholarship. You're attractive, more attractive for employment, and all those. So that is the value of standards, because when the standard is used in by entrepreneurs, it makes them go a level or two or three levels higher and become more competitive in the market. But
What
they
products are
are
covered?
voluntary.
Sorry. What products actually covered by the standard law?
Oh, in the standards law, um, it says that all products that are sold or imported into the Philippines should be safe. Okay, that is the standards law. That's 4109, Republic Act 4109. Now, I think what you are referring to would be those products that are placed under technical regulation. So, when I said earlier that standards are voluntary, that means that there is no compulsion to, to follow them. But of course, because we are looking at consumer welfare, there are certain products that are what you call technical regulation, which means that the requirements under the issuance must be followed. And that issuance is referenced on a standard. So let me give you an example. The Bureau of Philippine Standards administers a product certification scheme. I think one of the more common things that you would see that undergoes that scheme is the helmet, because we have a lot of motorcycles. People would notice there is a sticker on the helmet, the ICC sticker. Now, that means that if there is a sticker, it has undergone the certification process and it is safe to use. Now, Christmas is approaching. Christmas lights have to go through the product certification scheme. It also has an ICC sticker. So when I say it has to go through the product certification scheme, there are 87 products at this time that is listed by the Bureau of Philippine Standards, and you can look at that list in the BPS website, BPS portal in the DTI website, I mean. And that means that the requirements for those products, those 87 products, are mandatory. You cannot sell them whether you manufacture them locally or you import them into the Philippines without following the requirements. So, for instance, the ordinary rice cooker goes through that. The refrigerator, which is 3 to 8 cubic feet, has to go through that standard. Um, but if it is a refrigerator, the two-door big industrial type refrigerators, which I know a lot of people also have at home, that does not go through the certification scheme. Why? Because it is no longer considered as what an ordinary household uses. So the certification scheme is really there because the assumption is that ordinary households get to use this, like the iron, the plancha, the electric fan, TVs, and they may not have a retained electrician or electrical engineer. So when it gets to their home, if it goes through the certification process, they can always plug it in and they know that their home is safe and they are safe. So that is the use of that certification process.
Thank
I
you
hope that
for
that was clear to you.
that's very much clear. Thank you so much for that, Asik. In somewhat of a follow up to that one, Madam, with you know, in franchising, we have a lot of franchisors and especially franchisees
Right.
who are always looking for contractors. All right, and they, they're practically almost all of them are really scared of contractors because you never know what you get. Uh, Me personally, I always tell them to go to the contractors accreditation board, check that one out.
Right.
Uh, the funny thing is actually not really a lot of people know about that. What's your take on that, Madam? Is can the TTI something to do also to promote that one so that people will not fall for fake contractors?
Oh, you just gave me an idea. I think we can probably have a repeat of a webinar where we will invite the Philippine Contractors Accreditation Board,
Hmm.
because we have webinars 2 times a week.
Hmm.
Um, and you are right. When you advise your franchise, your members and the franchisees that they contract with, I think that the best way is really to ensure that the contractor has been accredited by the PCAB. So they have a contractor's license. Um, there is also a site for PCAB where they can look at whether that contractor has a valid license. Um, I think that that is the first thing to do, because if you have any problems after that, it will be easy for you to go to the PCAB and file a complaint against a contractor. Now, if the contractor is unlicensed, the PCAB does not have jurisdiction, but it will be accepted as a complaint by the DTI Maine, our group, as an as a violation of a fair trade law. So you will still have, in the complainant will still have redress, recourse against that particular contractor. But I think that to really save you the trouble, it would be good to look at that list first and ensure that the contractor is licensed. Because the licensing process of PICAB is such that they also make sure that they will they will indicate in the license for what particular works that contractor is licensed to perform. Because it could be that they cannot perform electrical works, but they're doing that. So you have to look at that license.
There's also a lot of let's talk about franchising, about our métier here in this franchise hour. There's a lot of scams in franchising going on right now, especially at Facebook. When I open my Facebook every day, I would say 80% of ads I see or announcements I see actually originate from scammers. It's amazing. The point here is, since selling a franchise is a business-to-business transaction, therefore it's actually not covered by the Republic Act 7394 because it's not business-to-consumer transaction, correct?
Yes.
What can actually now a scam person, a victim of a franchise scam do? What are you suggesting to them?
Well, if the victim will be still a consumer, which means that the victim can go against the scammer. So when you say business to business, it's between the franchisor and the franchisee, right?
Right.
But the transaction now between the ordinary consumer and that bogus franchisee is something that is covered under consumer protection, because we will treat the victim as a consumer. So we do get complaints on scams and all those. The problem, Mr. Kotik, is that these scammers, they don't even have, an email address or a physical address indicated in their page. When they sell these schemes to people, and they're quite talented. Ang gagaling nila eh. And they're able to convince. But when they realize that people are hot on their trail, the authorities are hot on their trail, all they need to do is abandon that site, create another one under another name, and that is why we always teach consumers to be more discerning. If it's too good to be true, it is not true. Um, and for these problems where we cannot even find an email address, we have no choice at all because we do not have the expertise, but to refer it to the National Bureau of Investigation or to the NICA, the National Intelligence Coordinating Agency. So that is where we would refer these complaints. Yes.
In our association or also in my seminars, I always tell them, look after that. A serious company will, for example, have landlines. The scammers always use cell phones, only cell phones. Most likely prepaid, correct, so that they can just throw away the SIM, put a new one in, and start a new scam. No?
And they're very cheap.
Correct. So they easy for them to change. And also when they get how to detect actually the scams. For example, to anybody who wants the money upfront before franchise agreement, that's definitely a scam. Anybody who offers a franchise agreement which is only 1 year in length of tenure or 2 years, that's also a side of a scam because that shows already they want to abandon the business after a year. So that's already a side. A real franchise agreement, normally we have 4 or 5 or even longer as an agreement. And the contract itself, a real franchise agreement is 25 to 50 pages in length. If the franchisee gets a 2 or 3 page contract, definitely that's a scam. Among other things, some of them have no trademarks, which is required also for every franchisor, and definitely they're not a member of any of the 3 associations, AFI, FIFA, or PFA. Diba? As a follow-up, and my last question is to you, Asek, and the government is trying now to protect the franchise buyers better. First of all, that was already before through a bureau order, which is actually, I like the bureau order. We are following, all my clients are using the franchise disclosure, and it's also a tool of marketing, actually. So my clients, I don't have a problem with it, but again, the other side, the scammers are not using any of that to show off that they could do something better. So that's why it's actually a very good idea that the government is coming up with an executive order. And can you tell us a little bit more what's coming up in our industry?
Well, for that draft executive order, if you recall, Mr. Kotik, we consulted with stakeholders, including franchise associations. We even had separate meetings with including your association.
Yes.
Even after the public consultation phase had already been completed, and the DTI had, through the secretary, had already transmitted our proposed draft, including all the records of consultations and the documents, the position papers of stakeholders. If you had submitted any, they are part of that. The records, they have been transmitted to the office of the president. So it now rests on the office of the president, as is the usual thing. It goes through legal scrubbing. So I guess it is at that stage where there is some legal scrubbing, although of course the Department of Justice was very much a part of our process. And in fact, the assignment was for DTI and the DOJ to work together, and we did. And so we are hoping, the secretary has been very vocal about him hoping that it will be signed soon. So hopefully, because of course, the bureau order, what was there for us, part of due diligence, was also adopted, among other things.
That's excellent. Let's hope it becomes something very positive for the franchise buyers. Franchise sellers can always adapt to it. That's not a problem. But the important is that the franchise buyers are properly protected. That what's going on right now on a very massive scale will hopefully end soon. All right. Thank you, Asek Cabochan. Before we end the show, I have to make some announcements. First of all, again, thank you so much to Asek for being our guest today in the Franchise Hour. In case you're interested to get a copy of my book, feel free to send us a notice and in Messenger or call the office, and we send you via email a free copy of my book all about franchising in PDF format. For the last 22 years, we do franchise development and Archive Franchise Consultancy. So if you have a company you want to develop, feel free to get in touch with us. And we do everything what you need to become a professional franchisor, from structuring the franchise, the manuals, the legal aspect, the marketing aspect, and everything else, what has to do with franchising. Globally, we are developing under the name Franmundo. So if you're watching us from outside the Philippines, you can contact us through franmundo.com. And if you have a distributorship business, you can contact us through GoFran, our sister company, who does distributorship packages, to do that on a professional level as well. And of course, all our clients are member of the Filipino International Franchise Association, and you can join us there too if you're a professional franchisor. So our magazine, the Franchising PH magazine, comes out every month. You can read it now. The latest issue is about the main topic, the expos what we are running right now. So we had already the Cebu Franchise Expo earlier in October. Now we're having the 16th Mindanao Franchise Expo virtual edition from October 16 to 30. Then we have the 5th Iloilo Franchise Expo virtual edition at iloilofranchise.com from November 5 to 15. And the 3rd Palawan Franchise Expo virtual edition from November 20 to 30. And again, we have franchise opportunity seminars on November 13 and on November 27, where you can learn about franchising and also where you get opportunities introduced. If you want to learn more about franchising, or you want to see the previous issues of the franchise hours, you can visit our YouTube channel, AK Franchise Consultancy, and you can watch hours and hours of topics about franchising. And next week we have Mr. Chef Chua from the Cycle House as guest, and in 2 weeks from now we have Ms. Rowena Natividad from the International Workspace Group, the one who operating Regis as guest. And the week after, on November 18, we have Mr. George Noel Winnicke as guest in the Franchise Hour. So, therefore, I would like to thank my guest for today, DTI Assistant Secretary Attorney Anne-Claire Cabochan, to be my guest. It was my honor, and it was really very informative what we learned today, and I'm very happy that that you agreed to be my guest today. Thank you so much, Madam. And you also have this week this month the Consumer Welfare Month.
Yes.
And
So
it's
we
still ongoing
celebrate
until
it
the
in
end of
October.
the month. And you have the e-Congress, which starts
Tomorrow.
tomorrow. How can
Right.
people join the e-Congress?
Mr. Kotik, I would just like to invite them to visit the DTI Consumer Care Facebook page. There is a social card there with a QR code that you can scan to register. Please join us tomorrow at 9 o'clock. 9
All
to
right.
12 for
From 9 to
e-Congress.
12. Okay. Thank you
Daghang
so much.
salamat, Mr. Kotik.
Daghang salamat, Ase Cabochan. And I hope to see you soon again. Thank you so much, all the viewers. See you again next Thursday at 4 p.m. Thank you.